something that I really love about being an artist, being an actor in particular, is that you work on so many different kinds of projects. And on every project, no matter if you're having a good time, if it's a bad play, if whatever, or if it's the best thing you've ever done, you learn something different on every project, whether it's about a time period or some part of yourself or about some person in history that you never knew about before, or how to eat with your hands. You'll learn something on every project. And I think that's fascinating. And I think people are fascinating. And I think like my own brain is fascinating. Learning about myself, I think, is very interesting. And so why wouldn't I want to be as open to that as I can in the work, into learning something, into figuring something out.
Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Anastasia Olowin is one of the stars of the film Ben and Suzanne, A Reunion in 4 Parts, which just premiered at South by Southwest. She sat down with me in New York City to talk about the work.
I want people to just trust me. I want listeners to trust me. I think we need this now. When I look at the climate of the film world, particularly the indie film world, it is frustrating. It is anger-inducing. I've had people already in this calendar year on the show supporting films, independent films that I love, that have died upon arrival in the movie theater. You know what I mean? And when you see good films that die like that and don't catch on, it's very, very frustrating. So I almost want to we need, the world needs like a champion of these things, and people should just listen. Let's forget about looking at box office mojo or baloney like this. My listeners need me to tell them things and the need to trust me. I want people to trust me. And I want them to trust me about this film that you're in. By the time people are listening to this, that will be the premiere week for this film. It's rare for me to be talking to somebody before, and this is your first feature film.
This is my first feature. I've done a handful of shorts, but this is my first feature.
And a lot of theater.
And a lot of theater, yes. A lot of theater.
But nobody knows you. So that's why I'm saying, just trust me, okay? Let's forget about what is going to happen with this film. In my world, this film is a success.
So I only watched it for the first time about a month ago, which was really wild. I wanted to wait for it to be fully baked.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure we'll talk about this over the course of this conversation, but it's a project that I've been involved with for 10 years.
10 years.
And we finally got to shoot the feature. And I find the editing process excruciating. Mm-hmm. I did not want to watch any version of this film that was not the final version because I didn't want to have any questions about it. I didn't want the sound to be off and take me out of it. Like, I just wanted to wait for it to be done and then watch the actual film and then come to terms with whatever feelings I had about my performance or, you know, all the things that actors think about in their heads instead of the movie that they're watching.
Yeah.
So I've only just watched it, and I think you're the first person that I've talked to who I don't personally know who's also watched it. So this is going to be an interesting conversation.
That's so funny. So we're talking about Ben and Suzanne, A Reunion in 4 Parts. It is premiering at South by Southwest. So it's funny because Shaun Seneviratne, the director of the film, he didn't know I saw the film. That's why I'm bringing it up.
Oh.
He was going to send me the film. So I'm sure like he's baffled that I saw this.
You've already seen it.
Hasn't had its world premiere yet. So before we even get into this film, talk to me about how you came into this endeavor of acting to begin with.
So I came to it as a kid. I really liked singing. I was that annoying child on the playground who was singing show tunes or whatever. We got that out of my system pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. But my mom signed me up for a musical theater camp at some point in elementary school, and I just kind of got laser focused on acting and performing, and I realized that I loved it, and I did it all through high school, and then I went to college for it. I went to the experimental theater wing at NYU. which is all about physically
Heard
based
good things
acting.
about that program.
Yeah, it's a great program. It's all physically based acting and creating your own work. And so I kind of went into it at that point being like, I just want to make good work with good people. I want to do theater. And at the time I was like, I want to do film and TV too, but I didn't understand the business at all. And I don't think that I think there's a version of my career where I had been a little more thoughtful in that realm and taken more steps in that space early on. But I started working pretty consistently in downtown theater. I was part of a theater company for 8 years. And then I produced my own work. I had a production company with a friend of mine and we did new plays. And then kind of gradually started shifting into the film world and realizing that those were also stories that I was really interested in telling. I'm really interested in the idea of story and form and how they kind of feed each other. And I think some stories are a short film, and some stories are a feature, and some stories are a play, and some are maybe a poem or an email. And I think that's really important to consider when you are a storyteller and you're making work, is what is the form that suits this story? And so the form of filmmaking became very interesting to me, and it is kind of a different muscle from theater making.
Right.
And I really love that and really enjoy that.
That's so cool. What made you decide on that program at NYU? Because you can choose, right? And I know some people that have chosen the other one, had a rough time, and then went to
transferred into ETW,
and then were like, this is my home. Yeah.
I feel like we hear a lot of stories like that because you're kind of, I don't know how the program works now, but when I was there, you're kind of stuck with your studio for the first 2 years, and then you have the opportunity to transfer if you want to. And so we had transfer track students, and we had so many people coming over being like, oh, this is so much better.
Yeah.
But I was ETW my whole time there, except I took 1 semester off to study at the Moscow Art Theater, which felt like such a balance to the work I was doing at ETW. So I actually did a summer high school program, which I don't think Tisch offers anymore, but you could do like a musical theater program and I think a Strasberg program maybe in New York City. And then there was another one that was in Paris. And so I applied to the one in Paris because I wanted to go to Paris, and I didn't realize that it was experimental theater in Paris. So I kind of showed up, and that's what the program was. And so I kind of fell into it and then realized that I really loved it. So when I then applied to NYU, I had a pretty clear idea of what I wanted to do there.
So when you spend 8 years at a theater company, you really are getting yourself, especially when you're doing new work, right? You're really kind of getting an idea of what kind of material you feel best with, right? And learning about yourself as an actor, I guess, right?
Definitely. I mean, I think I kind of got into producing as a way to facilitate myself working. Like I would see a project that I wanted to do or something that I was interested in, and it'd be like, well, why don't I just do it? Like I'm the only person I'm not going to sit around waiting to be cast in something. I'm the only person standing between me and this project, and I want to play this role. So let's figure out how to do that. And so having that kind of agency in my career has been, crucial for me, because coming from the theater world, it takes a while to build a career. And so knowing that I could always fall back on making my own work or facilitating, like commissioning a play or putting on my own thing, like knowing that I always had that in my back pocket made me feel like, okay, I am a working actor. And that is an identity that's really, important and valuable to hold on to. I think it's hard to be a working actor because there's not a lot of work a lot of the time. So I feel like I've been very fortunate to have discovered that I am good at that producerial side as well.
And so were you always during this time doing auditions for things outside of that world? And were they theater auditions mostly, or were there at times films?
A little bit of both. And this is actually a good segue into the 10-year story of the tourist cycle. So 10 years ago, I came across a backstage listing for this short film Tourists that Shaun had written.
Wow.
And I didn't know Shaun at the time. I just submit myself to this audition. But I remember that listing very well because I was, on backstage every day, shooting my shot.
Yeah.
And so many of the casting calls were either things that I was like, well, I could play this, but it's not interesting to me.
Yeah.
Or there were typos in the thing, or that's
a red
things
flag,
that
right?
Yeah, like little red flags on things. Or just roles that I didn't want to play and being like, there's nothing that I'm interested in. And I don't remember what the listing itself was. Shaun might still have it somewhere. But what I do remember, which was really rare, or that I hadn't really come across before, is that in the supporting materials that you can upload, Shaun had posted a lookbook. And it was really beautiful and had these beautiful reference images and was just so thoughtful in how he had put it together. So before I ever met Shaun, I felt some kind of a kinship to him. I really responded to that visual piece, and I really responded to the story itself, which that short film is these two characters, Ben and Suzanne, on a drive to the airport where she's going off to work in a different country. And flashbacks to their relationship up until then, and you're kind of left unclear as to whether or not they're saying goodbye for now or forever. And I thought it was a really beautiful story, and I connected with it right away. And then I met Shaun in the audition. And then, so we had...
Can we pause there? You're going into that audition then with some kind of respect or something because of that lookbook.
Absolutely.
That changes your energy.
Well, I went into it knowing that I really wanted to be a part of this project and feeling like I should be a part of this project.
Right.
That this was someone that I wanted to work with.
And you knew that you were probably going to be respected because this is an artist.
Yeah.
And he had a beautiful, thoughtful way of doing this.
Yeah.
And that changes your energy going in because you suspect that. These places are usually dens of ridiculousness, right?
I've had some weird auditions.
We're like, show me,
Right.
show me your stuff here. Are you the one? That kind of energy. And that matters.
It matters a lot. And so that first audition, I felt like very connected, and I was like, I got this. And also very, but you never really know. And then Shaun called me for a callback with Satya, the other actor who ended up doing this whole 10-year process together. And Shaun's apartment, so the original audition was at a space, and then the callback was at Shaun's apartment. And his apartment happened to be very close to mine in Williamsburg at the time. And it was a walk-up, and I went and I buzzed, and Shaun came down to meet me. And we went back up and realized that he had locked himself out of his apartment. So we did the callback in the stairwell of his apartment. And it felt very here we are, let's go, just go with it. It felt very DIY indie filmmaking. And, we were kids and we were like, sure, of course I'll do a callback in a hallway. And it ended up being great. It was wonderful. And then he cast us after that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
We need to pause here because I need to let Shaun tell his side of that story, which I asked for.
What?
And this is what Shaun says about that. Anastasia and I met back when I was doing casting for my short film Tourists, which was birthed out of wanting to explore ideas for the feature, which was called Continents then.
At the time.
The auditions were somewhat unorthodox. I was working my job at the time as a teaching assistant doing a summer film program for middle schoolers. She came in on my break for the audition, which I had posted on Backstage with a somewhat atypical casting post. Anastasia was the first person that came in. Vibes were on point from the jump. Instead of doing a scene, we improvised a lunch where she was meeting with a friend before her big trip abroad and just had to fill him in on what was going on with her life and how she felt about it all, particularly her parting with Ben.
I remember that now.
See, isn't this
That's
interesting?
Very cool, yeah.
She was awesome. It just felt like I was talking to the character. felt very true and effortless. I did this with a number of folks throughout the day, and that revealed so much of what I loved about Anastasia. She deep reads and understands things on an intuitive level. But beyond that, it was something about her essence. A really unquantifiable thing. But a character to me is essentially that actor's essence reformatted, so to speak. It just felt right. Callbacks with Satya solidified that, which were in the stairwell of my walk up because I had locked myself out of the apartment getting the door. She thought, getting the door?
Yeah, he came down to get
Apartment,
the door.
getting the door,
Yeah.
right, got it. She thought it was funny and offered me flip-flops.
Oh yeah, because he was barefoot and I lived, 2 blocks away, and I was like, do you want shoes for your feet?
This should be, an event like this should be a part of every audition because it throws things off so wonderfully, right?
Well, I think it also proved to Shaun that we could hang, we could roll with the punches of very low budget short filmmaking.
Right.
Where you're, on a shoestring, and sometimes things get weird and go wrong, and some people are game to play and some people aren't.
Right.
Which isn't a bad thing for the people who aren't game to play. It's just, a different way of working.
Right. Anastasia was Suzanne and Satya was Ben. And these are the folks I wanted to go with on this now 10-year journey. So 10 years. So you all made that film.
We made the short, we made Tourists. We all immediately were like, these are wonderful people.
Yeah.
We wanted, we knew that it was always going to be the prelude to a feature.
Uh-huh.
And so Shaun started writing the feature after that.
Kind of like a sequel to this moment, right? Or a redo of it?
I think when I say prelude for the short film, that's really what it's meant to be. It's this is a little moment before, and then the film itself is the event, I guess. Right. And Tourists came out beautifully, and we had a really lovely festival run with that. And Shaun started writing the feature. Yeah. I think over the 10 years, we should ask him how many drafts and different versions of the feature there have been. And pretty much every summer since then, we were like, oh, this summer we're making the feature. This summer we're making the feature. And it kept getting kicked down the road and kicked down the road, to the point where Satya and I were like, we're going to age out of these roles. This is not going to work out for us, and how sad for everyone. But I will say something that I respect so deeply from Shaun, and this is also just his integrity as a person. But there were so many, it would have been very easy for him to write the feature and be like, okay, I'm going to go get some big names to play these roles. Right. Very easy for him to do that, and we all would have understood. Mm-hmm. But he was so committed to us as these characters for 10 years, which is absolutely nuts, but also so meaningful and so special. And I think that the film that we finally made is imbued with the 10 years of knowing this story and knowing each other and becoming very dear friends. I was in Shaun's wedding. I was a bridesmaid. Amazing. I wear the bridesmaid dress that I wore in Shaun's wedding in Ben and Suzanne at some point. So there was a deep friendship that was formed there as well. Yeah. And then in the process of the feature getting kicked down and kicked out for various reasons, Shaun wrote another short film based around Ben's character that we shot in 2021, I think. Partially as just a way to kind of, tangibly dive back into these characters in this space, kind of checking in with them. And so that was a really lovely process too, to get to kind of revisit that. And then in November of 2022, I texted Shaun and I was like, hey, we made this Ben installment. We should make a Suzanne installment. What about me? Yeah. And he was like, yes, absolutely. Actually, I'm going to Sri Lanka to visit my dad in February. Do you want to come and we'll shoot something on Super 8? Wow. And I was like, the answer to that question is yes. There's no way I'm saying no to going to Sri Lanka and shooting whatever we shoot on Super 8. So I went with him. And that was a wild, wonderful week. We stayed with his family. We did a little road trip around.
Yeah.
And we also met with a couple of production companies in Sri Lanka while we were there. And that kind of, I think, made things, and Shaun, I won't speak for Shaun, but for me at least, it made actually making the feature feel tangible for the first time. But I didn't, because it had been such a long process, I was like, I don't believe this until I get on the plane.
Of course. And so when I see this film and I see something that I need to happening right away, which is feeling the authenticity of this connection between these people. I'm sure part of that has to do with the idea that even embarking on any kind of event that places you in the past of these characters is going to help you when you actually are doing the actual feature, because you have a backstory that you lived out.
Right.
In this case, it was shot on cameras, and it was its own film. I mean, people can do this in their own ways to create a living backstory. That's going to help me as an audience member, I think, feel the reality of things. And then you're actually liking these people. That also helps, right? All this helps to create what is special about this movie.
There's something really lovely about, because we all know each other so well, and especially Satya and I knowing Shaun so well, and Shaun knowing us so well. So parts of these characters have evolved to meet us a little bit. We've kind of met each other in the middle in some way,
right.
Even though, it's a very particular relationship and situation and all of that. There are elements of each of us, I think, in these characters, and there are elements of Shaun in these characters. And I think us just at this point, knowing his humor, knowing his sensibilities, knowing his aesthetic, just as a friend and a collaborator for so many years, that made a lot of things just kind of intuitive. Because it's like, I know how you would say this line. And it's not that I'm saying it that way to mimic that. It's just that I have a deeper understanding of this text because I know I have a deep understanding of where it came from. And I'm really grateful for that too, because it was inspired by this whole story was inspired by an experience that Shaun had in his own life. And he was both honoring that experience and also very open to fictionalizing it in a way that made sense for us. And that kind of generosity, I think, is rare as well.
And it's more than generosity, right? It's smart filmmaking, because you know that's where the collaboration is, where you, right? And you can actually make something better when the actor has an ownership of the character, right? And especially if you can add time to that, to those ingredients, and then you have a wonderful thing growing. Was this story of this feature always taking place where it took place?
No. So the movie, our film, Ben and Suzanne, A Reunion in 4 Parts, is about an American who comes to visit his girlfriend, who's also American, who's been working at an NGO in Sri Lanka. And Ben is of Indian heritage, but he grew up in New Jersey. And Suzanne also grew up in the States. So there's this interesting kind of levels and layers of this person who looks like they should belong in a place, but they don't really. And this person who absolutely does not look like they belong in this place, but speaks the language and has been trying to make a life there. And so that's the setup for it. And so Ben comes to visit Suzanne after a long time apart, and they take this road trip around Sri Lanka, and through various bits and places, their relationship gets challenged in many ways, and their individuality gets challenged in different ways. And it's very much about these two people coming together. And the film was originally titled Tourists because Shaun had this idea of people being tourists in each other's lives. And I think that's a great metaphor for relationships in some ways, because, sometimes you're with someone, you're like, this was a great 3-day stay and I don't need to come back. And sometimes you apply for citizenship. But you're experiencing a person for the first time. You're experiencing like, what do you like to eat? Like how do you sleep? Where do you like to go for, for fun? What parks do you visit? So that kind of metaphor of travel and relationships, I think, is really lovely.
Yeah.
And then, so yes, originally it was based on this trip that Shaun took to India to visit his girlfriend at the time who was working there. And so it was set in India for a long time. And then at a certain point, maybe 4 years ago, maybe more than that, Shaun might have a better idea of the timeline. We were all like, Shaun, your family is in Sri Lanka. Why don't we just shoot it in Sri Lanka? That makes so much more sense for everybody.
Yeah.
And that was so wonderful. I mean, his family was really involved in the making of the film. Wow. His brothers are like PAs and one character in the film. His dad was on set with us a little bit. Nice. His cousins were both in it as well. Nice. A lot of the local folks were family members.
Nice.
And it just felt like a real wonderful community of people coming together to make this. And it was entirely, to talk about indie filmmaking, there's no studio money in this project.
That's amazing.
Entirely funded by friends and family, which is, again, like unheard of. So we're very proud of it in so many ways. It's been a really special experience.
That's amazing. So the thing that had to happen, though, that must have been a little bit of a burden for you, is that you have to show that your character knows all of these things about this place and has to school your boyfriend about this stuff, right? We start out with just the way you eat the curry. Mm-hmm. If I was doing that, I would be like, well, I could do this very confidently. And I'd just be imagining, well, there's maybe some part of this that I'm doing here, where someone who knows this and eats this all the time in this way will know that I haven't been eating this like this, right? How did you deal with these kind of aspects of having to convey that your character is embedded in this land?
I think the nice leeway that we gave ourselves with that is that Suzanne's not perfect at this. She's still learning as well. And so I tried not to think about how that might come across. I tried to live with well, I'm learning this and she's been learning this. I think it was also really helpful that I was there in February before we shot in the summer, because I got a chance to try the food, to learn how to eat with my hands, to experience the space. And then Satya had never been there. So we did have that little bit of a dynamic of being like, oh, I was there before. Right. You've never been here. Let me show you this. Right. That was already kind of baked into the reality of what we were doing. Yeah. So yes, but also everyone was so helpful with me. I mean, our crew was wonderful and so lovely and supportive. You know, when you do any kind of film shoot, you don't always know what the group dynamic is going to be. You don't always know if everyone's going to be professional and capable and all of those things. And so we had hired this Sri Lankan crew. It was myself, Shaun, Satya, and our DP, Molly Scotty, who's brilliant. The four of us came over from the States, and then everyone else was local. Wow. And so we kind of went in being like, we don't know. Yeah. But they were wonderful and really supportive and really helpful in like helping me learn how to pronounce words. And I would, make them speak into my iPhone and record it and then like listen to it over and over and over again before I had to say anything in Sinhala. So they were very helpful and lovely.
Shaun is a big fan of Romer.
Oh yeah.
Right? And I am too.
Yes, he made us watch a lot of Romer before this.
Interesting. And you know what I respect about him? It's not, he can love someone like that and make a film on a shoestring budget independently and have the what I would call the spirit of Romer, but it's not like he's stealing stuff or kind of mimicking this style. He has his own style. But tell me about the actual shooting of this, because this is, again, at this point, after 10 years, Shaun probably was adaptable to the way you guys worked and the way that you liked to work and the way you worked best.
Well, the thing that is interesting is that because there have been different versions of the script over the years and different iterations of what might have happened to these characters on this road trip, there was a bit of us trying to figure out Cynthia and I trying to place ourselves in like, wait, what is this version of Ben and Suzanne? And like, okay, forget that. That's still a part, like that's still in the soup somehow, but like, that's not what we're doing here. Like now we're on this train. So there was a little bit of like mental gymnastics that we had to do, even though there was this deep understanding of these characters. But we went with the script that we shot, mostly written and some scenes outlined, detailed outlines of what Shaun wanted to happen in these moments. And then we got there and we shot for 2 days and then we went on strike.
Whoa. No way.
And that was crazy because, you know, SAG knew that we were going. Obviously, we're both SAG actors. They signed off on us going. And they knew that it was an indie film that absolutely had nothing to do with the studios. And they were like, at the time they were calling it a waiver, what became the interim agreement. But they were like, you know what, like, you'll be fine, you'll get a waiver, it'll be fine. So we get there and we go on strike, and it was really tough because we weren't sure that the strike was gonna, to our dear listeners, at that time we weren't totally sure if the strike was gonna happen or not. So we went with the possibility of like, maybe we will go on strike, maybe we won't, but we'll be fine. And so when they called the strike, we were like, oh shit, what do we, like, I guess we stop. And as you said, we're the leads in this film. There's not much they can do without us. It's literally called Ben and Suzanne. So fortunately, our crew, apparently strikes are a very common thing in Sri Lanka. So they were like, great, fantastic, unionize. Good for you. So they were very understanding of us shutting down. And when we were able to start back up again, I think pretty much everyone was able to come back, which is also, I'm really grateful for. But we shut down and then we waited 6 days for the agreement to come through, which was really excruciating because we, you know, weren't sure if we were going to run out of money and have to come back. We were kind of twiddling our thumbs at the Courtyard Marriott in Colombo, which is a beautiful hotel, big fans, love the staff, thank you very much. But it was also like we weren't there, I wasn't there to be on vacation.
Right.
I wasn't there to, you know, sit around and, or even to explore Sri Lanka. We went to a museum at one point and we saw Mission Impossible at one point, but it felt like this weird liminal space where we were just waiting to see if we could make this movie. And so during that time, we were like losing days. Shaun is cutting things and rewriting things. And so the script that we went with was not even what we ended up shooting, because we were trying to accommodate the fact that we weren't going to have as many days and as many. I think there was one location that we cut even. I can't remember all of the shifts. So I think between that and also all these past versions of the script, by the time we got up and shooting again, and we were able to add a couple of days at the end. So I think we were supposed to shoot for 18 days. We ended up shooting, Sethi and I shot for 15 days. They shot 1 day without us. So I feel like I blacked out during the shooting of the film. And when we left, I was like, I hope we have enough footage to make something out of this. So it felt a little chaotic in that sense. But also it was so rooted in Shaun. Like Shaun has such a specific vision and is such a smart aesthetic filmmaker that we had so many conversations about these characters over the years that it was, you know, we kind of just jumped in.
Well, I asked him also to tell me.
This is great. I feel like I'm learning secrets. I could ask him too, but I don't think he would tell me anything different.
No, you would never ask him what makes you special.
Me?
Right.
Oh, I would ask him that all the time.
You would?
I'm kidding.
I asked him, and he said, Anastasia is very artistically open. She wants to take in as much as she can that can inform the work. We've watched many movies and read many books together. It just felt like having a real partner through the whole process. She's also a how, not why kind of person.
Yes.
We can talk about that. Tell me, I'm going to get to the end of the sentence. She doesn't seek justification and is always more interested in the exploration. But what was that? What is that? How and why? Is that what that means right there?
Yeah.
Did he say it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I love that he said that, because that is directly from my work in experimental theater. The director of our theater company for those 8 years would always say, your motivation to cross from this side of the stage to that side of the stage on this line is because I told you to cross the stage. And he, not in like a, tyrant kind of way, but just like, I don't care what your motivation is. Like, you figure out what your motivation is if you need a motivation, but like, I've asked you to cross, so figure out how to make that work.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm not an actor who needs a lot of like, what was their childhood like? And, where is this really coming from? I think I am more intuitive. And so I think just understanding what the situation is and understanding where I'm meeting it is like, okay, like then I cross. Then that I have to, kind of do some internal justification for that. And if it doesn't feel right, then I'll be like, hey, Shaun, like, this doesn't feel right. I feel like I'd like to try this some other way. But most of the time it was like, okay, you want me to stand there? Okay. Yeah. I'll figure out how to stand there.
Yeah.
And I think there's also, a level of trust between myself and Shaun that made that part easier. But I feel like I work from a more intuitive place, I think.
Yeah. This reminds me of what you're talking about. Reminds me of when I was shooting my thesis film. I had an actor come in for a very small role where she had to stand on this strange sidewalk. I mean, it's strange because she's just standing on the sidewalk. And my character comes over to her and says something. I mean, the main character comes over to her and says something. And she said to me, Peter, on the day of the shoot, like, so we're about to shoot, she's like, why am I standing here? And I was like, what? What is this now? What are you saying to me? Why am I standing here? And I just said, I felt like she needed an answer. So I just said, oh, you're waiting for your husband.
Great.
Right?
Did that help her?
Well, I think it did, because she didn't ask again.
Great.
And then I remember thinking in my 21-year-old self there, like, why are you bothering me with this question? We're shooting this. Right? And I hate myself for thinking that, because every time I see this movie, it is so dumb that she's standing there. And I didn't know it then.
Right.
It's so dumb.
Right.
It makes no sense. When you look at it, it's like, why is someone standing at this part of the sidewalk like this?
Right.
Like, she was trying in a nice way to say, Peter, what the fuck is going on here? Right. So, but this brings up like you said though, and you said it. If something doesn't feel right, you're able to speak up, and just say, this doesn't feel right. And I think actors should do that.
I think so too.
And maybe she was feeling that, being nice about it, and did the nice thing, which is asking me in a nice way for the motivation. Now, waiting for your husband, I don't think that was a sufficient answer. When I look back on the scene and say, oh, then I would be standing over there, would have been my next question if I were her. Wouldn't I? Because that would make more sense.
Right.
Instead of this weird part of the sidewalk. And I think this gets into like, what should an actor do?
Well, I think a lot of actors are, we understand that our job is I hope we understand that our job is like one piece in a much larger cog of making the movie, and you only have a limited time on set. And so you're kind of like, I guess I'm sitting here now, like, okay, I don't know if I'm allowed to, suggest. And the wonderful thing about Shaun is that I always knew I could ask, and I always knew I could suggest. And Shaun, to his credit, like, is a very collaborative filmmaker. If our DP had an idea, he'd be like, sure, let's try it. If we had time, like, let's try this. He was very, very, very open to collaboration, even while being very committed to his own vision of things, which I think is hard for people to hold on to sometimes. This is making me think too of, I study with Bob Krakauer for online. Oh my God, we did do some online classes for a little while. Bob and Josh Mendelow, who was one of Bob's teachers, who are both wonderful. And Bob is very good at breaking down the idea, you know, you're making a picture and you're working within this frame and it's a visual medium. So you can feel as much as you want to feel, but if you're not telling the story within that frame, then no one's going to feel with you. And so physically, how do you change the shape? How do you tell the story in that way? And so I think that's also where, like, I don't necessarily need to know a motivation per se. I just need to know that I need to turn my head like this, and that will tell a story, and that's part of the bigger thing.
That's interesting. See, and for you to have that, and you've done a lot of shorts, but this is your first feature. A lot of people do a lot of features and they don't come to that, what you just said, you know, yet.
Well, that's how I work. I mean, I don't know if that's, you know, I don't think there's one prescriptive way to make anything.
Right.
But I think that kind of visual understanding, and I'm a visual learner as well, I think that's just helpful for me in my process.
And Shaun, let's go back to Shaun.
Shaun, this whole thing is like a love letter to Shaun Seneviratne.
Yes. And I said something about her that you discovered on the set, and he wrote that she's fearless.
Oh.
What do you think he means by that?
I know exactly what he means by that, because I practically singed my eyelashes off running past those fireworks in that one scene.
Oh my God, yeah. Oh my God.
That was a wild night.
So wait, those were just happening?
No, we staged that.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And so how did they almost hit you? Because they needed to be in the shot.
Yeah, because they were real close to the road.
Wow.
Yeah.
But it's worth it. I mean, if you had gotten singed and your eyebrows came off, at least it would grow back.
I was like, is there someone here with a fire blanket in case I catch on fire? Like, it was the middle of the night and these fireworks are going off on the side of the road and we stopped traffic and I'm running past them. And I was like, I guess I'm Tom Cruise now.
Wow.
I guess this is my action movie.
But you know that's not what he means. And you know it.
Yeah.
So tell me what you think he means. Maybe it's not a fair question to ask you.
I don't know if that's a fair question to ask me.
But when you know fearless actors you've worked with, what did they have?
I mean, there's I think a vulnerability and an openness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is, it's rare. I mean, you know what I mean? Like there's people that get by and they get work and they don't go there. Why are you not afraid to go there?
Because that's the work. That's the fun part.
Yeah.
That's the exploration of things. I think something that I really love about being an artist, being an actor in particular, is that you work on so many different kinds of projects. And on every project, no matter if you're having a good time, if it's a bad play, if whatever, or if it's the best thing you've ever done, you learn something different on every project, whether it's about a time period or some part of yourself or about some person in history that you never knew about before, or how to eat with your hands. You'll learn something on every project. And I think that's fascinating. And I think people are fascinating. And I think like my own brain is fascinating. Learning about myself, I think, is very interesting. I've been in therapy for a long time. I don't know if you can tell. But, that's all just very interesting to me. And so why wouldn't I want to be as open to that as I can in the work, into learning something, into figuring something out?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If you had your druthers and if you had no limitations and money didn't even matter at all, let's dream for a second.
Okay.
What would you be doing in this work?
I think just more of it. I am happiest when I am working. That's something that I've learned about myself, which is partially why I keep working, or keep finding ways to work, even though this industry is really, really tough. So I just want to keep doing it. I want to make more indie films. I think there's something really exciting and raw and fun about that. But I'd love to do studio stuff too. Shaun and I have a joke that I remind him of Mary Tyler Moore, which is very generous of him. But like her kind of career is very fun. To do some kind of a show like that would be delightful.
Yes. And then to do some kind of Ordinary People at one point.
Oh my
right?
gosh, yes.
After that.
Yes. I want to work with Yorgos.
Yeah.
I also love Triangle of Sadness. Like those kind of films are so fun to me.
Yeah.
And I would love to do all of that. But yeah, I think like Shaun and I have connected very deeply on Criterion art house style films.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my dreams would lie.
Yeah.
But again, I think there's something really interesting about form and the idea of a studio film and the idea of a sitcom and the idea of an independent film. They're different versions of storytelling, and I'm curious about all of them.
Anastasia Olowin, thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been so delightful. Thank you for having me.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of The Gotham, formerly IFP. Listen to back episodes of this podcast at filmmakermagazine.com or wherever you get your podcasts.